Okay, so what I wanted to do was just take a few minutes and kind of address a topic that we really haven't talked about over the course of the last few weeks. Um, and that's the idea of approaching psychology from a Christian worldview because, we've spent a lot of time talking about mental processes and behavior. Kind of at a cellular level, at a neuronal level, talking about neurotransmitters and nervous systems and neurons and synapses and all of that. And I think it's very it's very easy to fall into this reductionistic point of view in that you start to think of all behavior and mental processes occurring at a cellular level. And that's exactly what secular psychologists would do. They do believe that all behavior and mental processes originate at a neuronal level. But I think if you are a Christian, then you need to approach this from a Christian worldview. And what I mean by that is just it's the way that you perceive the information that we've discussed. So, as a concrete example, there's a book out there called The Integration of Psychology and Christianity by David Entwistle, and he goes through this story about how he goes and he visits his daughter at college, and he's out on a walking path, and it's a walking path that just goes down and back, and he gets up early one morning and he's going out on this walking path, and the sun is in his eyes, but he can see as he's on this path there's this huge magnificent tree, and he thinks it's beautiful, and he admires the tree for a second, and he gets to the end of the path and he starts walking back, and now the sun as it is back, and he can see clearly everything that's in front of him, and he says he gets back to the same tree, and now that he's not being blinded by this light, he can see that the tree, it has mold and fungus, it's got woodpecker damage and all this sort of stuff. And the point that he makes is the point he was making is at both angles he was looking at the same thing. But depending on where he was looking at it from, it changed the way that he perceived the object. And that's kind of how you have to approach psychology. If you're approaching psychology from a secular worldview, it's going to look completely different, and your interpretation of psychology is going to be completely different compared to if you approach psychology from a Christian worldview. And historically, psychology and Christianity, and science and religion in general, there's been this dissonance, and within psychology specifically, I think that's in part due to a lot of the figureheads in psychology being anti-religion. When you look at Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow and Sigmund Freud, these guys were not religious. And so they're the ones that kind of in part represent psychology. And not only that, I mean, psychology tries to explain why we do the things that we do and why we are the people that we are. And in a sense, that's kind of the same turf that is Christianity, talking about sin and temptation and why we make the decisions that we make. And so they're really fighting for the same turf. And that's not to say that there can't be an integration of psychology and Christianity. I think the people that view that have that thinking are ignorant, not stupid, but just ignorant in that they're uneducated. And what I mean by that is most psychologists are not theologians, and most theologians are not psychologists, and so they don't fully understand how these two disciplines can interact. And I think as you move forward, if you take additional psychology classes, I think what you need to do is, as the saying goes, you don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. In other words, just because someone like Sigmund Freud was an atheist doesn't mean you need to totally disregard the information that's being proposed by Freud. I think what you need to do is, if you are a Christian, then you view Scripture as being truth. And what you need to do is essentially run the information, run the psychological information through the colander of Scripture, or the filter of Scripture, if you will. And if you know that whatever this person is proposing, whatever this theorist is proposing, is in direct contradiction with what is being said in Scripture, then you know that that's something that you probably shouldn't implement in your own practice. And not only that, I mean, there's a lot of times in Scripture that talks about counseling, and so you've got some overlap. As an example, Proverbs 15:22 says, "Without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors they succeed." Proverbs 13:10, "By insolence comes nothing but strife, but with those who take advice is wisdom." Proverbs 11:14, "Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in abundance of counselors there is safety." The purpose, it just goes on and on. So again, I mean, there's a lot of instances of this idea of counseling, which is a big part of psychology, and so you've got some overlap there in counseling and Scripture. So I just wanted you to know that you can have, it's not a mutually exclusive thing. It's not as though you can be a psychologist but can't be religious, or it's not as though if you're a scientist, you can't be religious. I mean, there is the opportunity for integration of science and religion and psychology and Christianity, and I just don't want to lose sight of this as we approached a lot of this course looking at a secular worldview. So if you have any questions about this, or you want to talk about this in more depth, definitely shoot me an email. It doesn't matter if the course has ended. If you want to talk about this, don't hesitate to reach out and shoot me an email. It's been a pleasure working with you guys. I hope you've enjoyed the course, and I will see you guys